it's not going to start about Macbeth. It's going to be broader about the English language and a little bit of history. So if you have your history brain, strap it on. You might want to get this down first. I want to go back in time a little bit. It's going back to the Middle Ages. I know you guys are studying like the year 1250 to what, modern day in world history, kind of?
Like 1900.
Yeah, 20th century, jeez. That's a lot of time. Hey, I'm focusing specifically on this word, English, the language that we all share, and a little bit about the country that it kind of comes from. Get the years down, if you would. The era of Middle English is about 4.5 centuries. It's really long, it's really big. It spans the entire medieval period. You might want to put a note above this, just to note that before Middle English, English still existed as a language. It was called, well, we call it now, it wasn't called then, but we call it now, Old English. That's, scribble it down real quick. It's capital O, capital E. Old English was English prior to this date. That is a very long time ago. If you heard it, you wouldn't recognize hardly any words. It would sound like a foreign language to you. Even Middle English is something that's kind of hard to make out. So I guess if there's a takeaway, don't call Shakespeare's language Old English. It is English that's old, but it's not Old English. Old English is a whole other piece. Old English is pre-medieval, which is dusty, crusty, looks like Nordic ruins. Let's talk about Middle English. This is the early adolescent period of the English language. 1066 is the year I want you to get to, and I want you to know what happened then, mostly because y'all are studying, well, language. Especially you French students should know this. In 1066, the Normans conquered England. You might know that England is situated on an island, as an island body, a nation that is in the continent of Europe. Nearby, many other nations. The Normans were Vikingers, or like seafaring people. They plundered, they pillaged. You know what Vikings are. They might get offended if they got looped in with specific groups of Scandinavians who were called Vikingers, but whatever, I don't care. The Normans were Vikings. They spoke with the French dialect, and that French dialect had a huge impact on how English people speak. If you are a French student, you might notice some really interesting contrasts and similarities in how English and French work. Before this time, English was, it had a written language. It did already have some of the letters in the alphabet that we have now, but it became a lot closer to what you and I speak today when the Normans invaded. I don't need you to write this part down, but you could look at it and blink and say, oh yeah, I know what that is. During this period, you had the Dark Ages. You had the Crusades. You had the 100 Years' War. There's Joan of Arc. And that was a conflict between France and England, mostly. And the Black Death, which had people dying at a wild, wild rate. If you touched on any of these in world history, you kind of fly past all these things. The big takeaway to get, and what you might want to write down here, is the Middle Ages for the English language was 4.5 centuries of chaotic social and political upheaval. It was a mess. It was not a time that language got really more complicated and nuanced or more like elevated. Art was not like super, super important. It was more about surviving. Okay, let's get fast to move through this. I want you to know why this period ends too. Technology is usually the reason that language shifts in a major way. Or, I don't know, genocide's been terrible. Usually, technology has a huge impact. Here it is, the printing press. Now, English people did not invent the printing press. Johannes Gutenberg, a German person, did. But the first printing press to be installed in England was in 1470. I want you to know that just because about 30 years after that, when you had little people growing up and like becoming literate, like about 30 years later, you had fully grown adults who had their whole lives where they could kind of like read stuff. They had access to printed text. It shifted the language in a major way. If you can take, I don't know, maybe you don't know how a printing press works. You see that kind of jacked dude pulling down the press. He could do that like 50 times in a very short period of time, and you'd have 50 pages, as opposed to hand copying stuff, which is very, very tedious. Suddenly you had a lot to read. A lot of it was like, you could print Bibles, you could print the news, you could print publications that people could kind of learn to read with. One thing that this had a big impact on was access to text. Okay, don't copy this down, but I'll just run through it real quick. There weren't novels being published back then. There also weren't like really poems delving into kind of psychological issues. Most of the literature back then dealt with knights going on quests, usually for religious purposes, or maybe they're fighting a monster to save a princess. You have allegorical poems like the pebble and the acorn was a very kind of common thing back then. It's not actually a medieval poem, but it kind of has the vibe of one. Or they were religious plays or folk ballads. And guys, if you're actively acting, just know I'm recording for the absent folks. So if you need to whisper, strap your lips around somebody's ear and whisper directly in their soft little brain. I don't want them to hear you guys derping out. You don't need to write down this guy's name, but I want you to get 2 terms down really quick. There's 2 terms you're going to need to be familiar with when we get into Macbeth. Something that happened in the Middle Ages was this. Geoffrey Chaucer, a guy who wrote this collection of stories called the Canterbury Tales, read some Italian literature and said, you know what, I think I can do this in English too. And for the first time, somebody in English tried certain types of meter and certain types of rhyme. If you know anything about poetry, you know that what makes it poetry is that it sounds interesting, or it hits a little bit different. It's the vibe of the text. 2 things that make that happen are the beat, that's the meter, and the rhyme scheme, which you actually saw both of these in the sonnet today. We'll talk about them later in just a bit, but you might write them down as a, what's that? Put a little question mark next to it. How many is penta? You guys know?
5.
Yeah, you guys got your numbers down. How many is this? How many is this?
2.
Hopefully it's 2, otherwise you gotta throw them. That's bad. We'll talk about these in just a sec. These are useful, and for the first time, these sort of enter the English language. I don't want to be mean, but it's easier to rhyme and write sound meter in other languages that aren't English. English is such a hodgepodge of stuff. Italian and Spanish, a little easier sometimes. Hey, you don't need that, you don't need that. You don't need to copy these, but I want to touch on them real briefly. Again, during the Middle Ages, which is, again, I didn't say this. This is the period in which Macbeth is set. This is when it is set, but it was not when it was written. Thankfully, Macbeth was written in a language that we can read. But the themes of literature back then had a lot to do with right and wrong. Courtly love. This is the idea of love as like a really pure concept. Anything resembling physical affection, anything that could like lead to sex was considered dangerous, sinful, and like the slippery path to hell. Yes, even like touching hands. You're in danger, buddy. You see this still kind of show up sometimes, like if the superhero in the movie like can't be with the person they love because they're going to be in danger. But it's a very kind of archaic theme. Chivalry is all about the knights, the code of the knights, like being heroic and brave and gentlemanly and all that. These are just profoundly religious. They deal with black and white morality. You didn't have a lot of literature exploring the gray areas. That's what I'm trying to get to. You don't need to know these, but I think they're interesting, so I'll talk about them for like 10 seconds. There were other letters in the English language that got deleted during this period. They got deleted because that previously seen jacked guy pulling the printing press decided we don't need 2 letters that both make the same sound. So take a look at this one. If you see how it kind of looks like teeth in a tongue? Can you make that shape and then blow? A lot of these letters actually show you how they're pronounced. This is the thorn. If you put your tongue between your teeth and go, it makes the sound. This kind of fell out of fashion. It fell out of use over time because we had a TH that was doing the exact same thing. This is not me reading. I wouldn't try to sound super academic about Middle English, but I want you to hear what English sounded like around the year 1350. Around the year 1350. This is an academic reading of a piece from Sir Gawain and the Green Knights.
The green knicht upon ground gravely him dresses, a little lute with the head, the lair he discovers. His long lovely lockes he laid over his croon. Let the naked neck to the note shiver.
Okay.
Nah, that was just a clip of most.
What does it sound like to you?
Welsh. German.
Welsh and German, sure, yeah. It's very guttural. You might notice a few words that sounded familiar. Did you notice any words you could recognize?
Naked.
Naked, yeah, it doesn't change. Anything else? His, yeah. His. Notice one thing is weird. Every vowel is pronounced in Middle English. Every vowel. You might have noticed the word night. It sounded like it said all the letters kind of made their sound briefly. This changes drastically in only about 150 years. If I zapped you back 150 years, like to the American Civil War, you'd be fine. Everyone would understand you. You could understand them. It would not be a drastic change. If you got somebody from Shakespeare's day and shot them back 150 years, there would be a struggle, a big struggle, because language changed a lot in a short period of time. Okay, we do not need that. We are switching to this. I'm almost there, just a sec. Chunky. You with me? Don't shift into monkey copy mode, but we are shifting gears for our little horizontal line. I want you to know the period of English in which Macbeth was written, and which Shakespeare wrote. The beginning of the language that you and I speak now. Early modern English and the Elizabethan era. If you know what and again, if you know this as the Renaissance in world history, you could write that down, because that is absolutely what we're talking about. But at least when it comes to the English language, linguists would call this the early modern era. Notice you and I speak modern English. This is the early modern era. This is kind of like English fully entering adolescence. However, it's not really puberty during this time. Things are changing, and it's very chaotic, and it's very new. Write down the dates really quick, and notice it's only about 150 years. And you might know a little bit about this. You might know a little bit about Queen Elizabeth. You don't have to know a lot about government and politics in this time, but we're going to talk about how it impacts a little bit about Shakespeare and Macbeth. Can I do this? There's some pictures. Neat. I already gave you that. If you read the little reading Shakespeare packet, you already know what I'm talking about here. Are you with me? You are a modern reader. There's 3 things, though, that I want you to note down. These are the things that are going to cause you trouble. Number 1, you'll run into some trouble with changes in grammar. Grammar. You might say, grammar, I'm bad at grammar. That's okay. Shakespeare would have been bad at grammar if we pulled him forward and make him do quills. Dude would die. Dude would fail out real hard. Of course, I'm not going to make an easy joke. It's punching down. It's not fun.
Oh, okay.
The midget fights. Word meaning. Word meaning. Number 2, word meaning. What's great about your book, by the way, with word meanings, is unless your book is absolutely terrible, it has footnotes on the side. This one doesn't. That's why I took it from somebody, because it's not going to help them very much. But your book has great help with word meanings. It's not about crazy vocabulary. You're not going to run into language like Frankenstein. You say, oh my gosh, what is that? I guess I can figure it out. A lot of it is that words had more meaning. They were broader. They could be used more versatilely. The concrete was still wet. And last of all, spelling. I want you to write spelling down, but then gently cross it out. Because, thankfully, whoever edited your book, whatever academics published your book, they've normalized the spelling. I'll mention spelling because even Shakespeare's name, all the physical copies we have of him signing his own name, he spelled it 3 different ways. I'm not kidding. Even the spelling of your name was more fluid back then. The concept of standard spelling was not a thing until about the middle of the 1600s. Okay. You don't need to copy this down, but just hear me. If it kind of strikes a chord, scribble something. Spelling got standardized around this time, during this time period, like I just said. By the end of this period, you might say, what ends early modern English, Mr. Ben? Spelling kind of gets standardized, and certain rules in English kind of get, the concrete is wet. Okay, you can't scratch your name in it anymore. Some of the rules finally get codified. But it didn't happen overnight. You had a lot of people, this is still coming on the end of the Black Death. If you're a French student, I guess I'll say this, especially if you're a French student, you should write this down. Anybody here who's French? You're all Spanish. A couple of you are French. I want you to note that England and France, well, maybe they still do, but they have had a very fraught relationship throughout world history. So the English accent that you might be picturing when you think of Shakespeare, it's probably not accurate. If you heard as far as linguists can tell, the English accent from Shakespeare's day, it's hard to describe what it sounds like. I'll play something for you sometime. But the English accent kind of, at the time at least, was often defined by how French they wanted to sound or how non-French they wanted to sound. Some of the weird pronunciations we have in English, if you see memes about words that end in O-U-G-H, like through and tough and rough and dough, and why they sound so different, one of the reasons for that is English people trying to sound French or trying not to sound French, depending on how much England liked French people at the time. All right, let's talk a little bit about Queen Elizabeth. This is one thing to yap about. I told you to write down something about the Elizabethan era. Did she ever show up in any of your world history notes somewhere? The British Empire was a pretty big thing. It's okay. It's a footnote, minor stuff. It's okay. I only want you to know that she reigned around 1558. This is the very, very beginning of when Shakespeare started to even be a person. She was a very old queen when he kind of was a grown man. Her reign, though, is kind of considered this golden age. It was great if you were English. It was not so great if you were being, invaded or conquered. We sort of have the beginning of colonialism and the slave trade and things like that starting to happen during this era of English history. But one thing that does happen, and I know you know the word Renaissance. Yes, capital R. Renaissance just means like a rebirth or a renewal. If you're an arts student, then you know that that's a nice thing to be able to do in school. The arts weren't really seen prior to this as a meaningful academic pursuit in any way. When a country's kind of well at peace, or at least kind of comfortable, the arts usually do some interesting stuff. And that's one of the reasons Shakespeare was even kind of able to be a writer. I'm going to skip that. I want to talk about the next monarch during this era. Write this guy's name down because this is where we're getting closer to talking about Macbeth. I know your hand's starting to hurt. Top of your knuckles, keep on moving. King James. If you know the name, and by the way, leave a little bit of space by this guy because we're going to talk about him later. My notes are a little bit out of order. It's a little bit janky. But leave some space. King James was an odd dude. He was a chaotic king. He was a controversial king. He had Scottish blood, and some people did not like that. He's most well known, probably in history, for authorizing a retranslation of Christian scripture. You might know of a King James Bible. It wasn't called that. It was called the Authorized Version. And there was an English Bible that already existed. He wanted a better one. And he also wanted to change some names. Quite notably, he did not like the book of Jacob. He thought it sounded too Jewish, and he changed Jacob to James because, hey, I'm James. That sounds cool. He also funded Shakespeare, like personally bankrolled him. If you wanted to go back and kill like one person to totally change the English language, it would be King James. Why? These are the top two most read works in the English language to this day. The English translation of the Christian Bible and Shakespeare. Whether or not you've touched either of them, they've had a massive impact, like a ripple effect on the English language. Leave some space. Skip, because we're going to come back to them. Just leave a little box on the side. We're going to pop back to King James. You don't need much, maybe like the size of your hand. This is something I want to tell you. You do not have to write this part down. When he said, hey guys, we need to translate the Bible, I want it to be like, it was really like, let's make Britain great again. We need the Christian scripture in our native tongue in a way that like glories the text and makes us sound good. He realized that English was kind of lacking. English was kind of weak. English pronouns were kind of wimpy. Greek and Hebrew, which were the languages, Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic, which were the three languages that Christian scripture were written in, had all sorts of complicated grammar that the pronouns could do that English just didn't have. So he said, you know what we should do? We should try to use those old pronouns, thee and thou and thy. People had stopped using them. He wanted to bring them back. Not to sound fancy, but because they did something that modern English couldn't do. We'll talk about this. I want to show them to you. Write these down. These are important. Springing from King James. He is not personally responsible, but it's really, really, really tied to him. He kind of single-handedly brought these back. First, I want you to know that English used to have a singular you. And if you're a Spanish or French student, you already know what I'm talking about. You might want to write down your pronouns. Maybe you already kind of, yeah, you with me? You know your singulars and your plurals and your formals and your informals? If you don't, you're cooked, man. I don't know. Don't go to Spanish or French ever again. What you need to know for English, for English, oh my God. What you need to know for Macbeth is that when you see thee, thou, thine, and thine, or even, I guess, thyself, you can throw thyself in there. To thine own self be true. It's always singular. Always. In English now, if I say, hey, you might get confused. You might go, are you talking to me? Are you talking to all of us? If the teacher's yelling, like, I don't know why you did this. They're like, are you yelling at me? Are you yelling at the whole class? There's a lot of ambiguity with contemporary English because now we only use these. And we don't use ye anymore. Don't worry about it. Ye is just in there. If you see you, I'll say this too. If you see thou, thee, thy, or thine, not only is it always singular, it's also informal. I don't have to teach you guys about formal and informal pronouns because your Spanish and French teachers probably already talked about that. But it will help you understand dialogue in Macbeth in a major way. Down here, if you see you, it's usually plural or formal. If you're talking to the king, if you're talking to somebody you really want to give them respect, you'll use you. You got me? This is important. There are going to be quiz questions about this, man. Okay, slide on. You do not need to know this nonsense. I just want to show that to you for a second. Don't have a panic attack. If you get stuck, you can always ask. Boom. Okay, let's talk about this era. By the way, this is the era where Macbeth was written. I'm going to use words like Elizabethan, just because Queen Elizabeth was queen when this era started. These are some common themes of plays. If you want to go see a play back then, and you want to get these down, you're going to say, it's bad. I didn't know. My notes are kind of sucky. It's really bad. I got 5 quiz questions wrong because my notes are bad. That's okay. I don't want that to be you. If you want to see if you don't know what the word drama means a play. Drama means a story that you can watch. You sit in a seat and watch it play out in front of you. These are the 4 biggest things that were happening on stage in Shakespeare's day. Revenge. People loved a revenge story. Shakespeare would eat up John Wick. It would be his favorite thing in the world. That said, sensationalism and melodrama, man. If you could probably come up with good examples. I don't know, maybe your mom watches Grey's Anatomy. Morrissey watches Grey's Anatomy.
I do not.
I know you don't. Sorry. Any stories that really, really crank up the dial of human emotion to the max, like to 11. It almost makes people act like crazier than people actually act. Are you guys with me? Yeah. Stories that do that. This got really popular during that time. This was a new thing. The last thing, you might say, what is the human condition? That's the question of what it is to be a person. Now, the neat thing about Shakespeare is he does touch on these things, but he usually does something to subvert them. He usually does something to mess with them. One of the reasons Shakespeare stuck around and a lot of other playwrights from this time period haven't stuck around is because he did something to kind of make these complicated and make it a little bit weird. We're about to talk about Shakespeare. Get yourself ready. Okay. I do want you to get his name. I put a little horizontal line. Put a little horizontal line to show that we've entered like a new chunk of your notes. Don't copy this down. Just get his name down. I guess get his whole name down. You have to use his whole name. But know how to spell Shakespeare. Yes, you're going to be writing, I know it was Satrapi. Satrapi does this. Shelley does this. Shelley does this. You'll be using Shakespeare's name occasionally to talk about his choices. Good morning. Have his name down. I'm about to give you a little bit of biographical information. If you've read any of Shakespeare's plays, neat. That's a great starting point. If there's a reason that he kind of has stuck around over time, it's because critics deem him as very gifted and versatile. Let's talk a little bit about what you actually need to know about meet Bill. You like that? Cute. I want you to know when he was born. His birthday's coming up in like a little over a month.
You just celebrated this, right?
Sure, we'll do something.
Can we have ice cream?
You guys might have to refine. I didn't forget. I didn't forget. I need to make sure you guys are actually out here. Maybe you guys deserve donuts. Jeez. We can't do a Wednesday because we're going to jump in and start acting.
Uh-oh.
But we'll do it. Don't worry. We'll have a day. I want you to know he was born around London. I don't want anyone to think Shakespeare was American, or I don't know that he lived in the 1980s. You should know roughly when he was born. He was born in the 1560s. I don't really care that you know he's a glove maker, or his dad was a glove maker. But I want you to. His dad was a blue collar worker. He wasn't like a noble. He wasn't like a lord who owned like 1,000 acres and like a whole farm. He made things. One thing about gloves is back then, a lot of people needed gloves. People from all walks of life. So he probably ran into all sorts of people in his dad's business. Also, undoubtedly, Shakespeare probably as a kid was learning how to make gloves, because that's what you would kind of do back then. You'd learn what your parents did and just kind of rinse and repeat. He also didn't have a really formal education beyond grammar school. Grammar school would end somewhere around like 7th grade-ish. That's where formal education would end. And beyond that, you'd be going to like finishing school, you'd be going to like university studies. Okay, slide on. I want you to know that he married somebody. It doesn't matter that her name is Anne Hathaway, like the actress, not the actress. She was a few years older than him. He got married at 18, which was pretty common back then for a guy to be 18 and get married. It was actually a little bit strange that she was 8 years his senior. Yeah. He left his family behind. Now that sounds really bad. I keep meaning to change this. It sounds like he just like ditched them and never came back. He did. He was connected. But he left home to go to the city. He kind of had a life out in the country. He left his family behind and moved to London. After a few years, when he was 28, I guess it would be, he'd become a household name. He'd become an actor and a playwright. He was an immediate success. I want you to get the word playwright down. By the way, right here, I know this looks like it's misspelled. I kind of hate the way it's spelled, but that's the word. It's somebody who writes plays. It's a writer who writes plays. So if you ever get bored using Shakespeare's name, you could say the playwright. Sounds elegant, but it's appropriate. It's worth noting he started as an actor, and he was in his 20s. He was a young guy when he started. He didn't keep acting. He shifted to write and produce, and of course, direct. His company's name was the Lord Chamberlain's Men. Nowadays, if you were starting like an artistic endeavor, you might look for companies to back you up. Back then, it wasn't a company so much as it was rich nobles with a lot of money. So he actually put his name on it. You're like, you're not the Coca-Cola boys or whatever. You're Lord Chamberlain's Men. It's kind of like sponsorship on your livery. Okay. This is really. You got it. I'm not going to drill you on itty bitty details, but I want you to get the major beats. Okay. Pretty soon, Shakespeare became the most popular playwright of his day. Other people were writing plays. It was a very popular thing to go see plays, but Shakespeare sort of rose to the top as the most well-known, even in his day. His theater troupe, and I know that word also looks misspelled, but if you're a thespian, you've probably seen it before. A troupe is a group of artists who work together to make stories on the stage. They got, I say adopted, that kind of sounds like they all were like orphans or something. They got sponsored by not just Lord Chamberlain, but the King of England, which is a pretty damn big deal. So I'm trying to find my theme logs. I go back to King James. We got to talk about King James really quick. This is 1603, by the way, which is right around the time that he wrote Macbeth. We're going to talk about that in a second. Oh my gosh. He retired. I don't need you to know the exact date that he retired, but I want you to know that when he retired, he had written over 37 plays. There's a lot of Shakespeare's plays. I have not read them all. I had to read a lot of comedies for a class in college. I had to read like 7 comedies in 2 weeks. So honestly, for the rest of my life, even if I wanted to, I probably couldn't separate them in my head because they're all messed up together. He died. You might notice what's interesting. Yeah, it's wild. I don't know. No one knows. No one knows why or what. If it's not really dark and sad, or is it just a cute coincidence? He died for the day, a pretty old guy, natural causes, nothing weird to report there. But he died on his birthday. Let's talk a little bit about King James. Sorry, my notes are a little jacked up. That's why my voice matters here. I'll guide you through. Go back to King James real quick. If you want to draw an arrow, you can. About King James, this is the same guy I was talking about translating the Bible. He didn't do it himself. He hired a bunch of academics to do it. But he's really responsible for sponsoring Shakespeare and getting Christian scripture written in the way that it was, in a way that really impacted the English language. This is really important to Macbeth, because we're about to shift gears and talk about Macbeth. King James was a writer. So King James was a king who had a long bloodline. He could trace his bloodline way back to the Middle Ages, all the way back to a guy named Banquo. And you want to write down Banquo's name. Banquo was King James' great granddad. 8 generations. I know that's crazy, but this is actually kind of important to Macbeth at one point. So Shakespeare liked to read history. He got his inspiration from all sorts of places. A lot of his plays are actually like borrowed from other stories. Plagiarism wasn't a thing back then. Like Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet. Romeo and Juliet is taken from an Italian story about 2 lovers. Hamlet is taken from an old Danish legend. Macbeth is taken from English history. However, Shakespeare definitely wrote some fan fiction. I want you to catch what he changed about history. In the real history book, Banquo was not a good guy. Banquo was pretty devious. He killed the king. He was a backstabber. He was a crazy Scotsman. The problem with this is the time that Shakespeare is writing, a lot of people didn't like King James. A lot of people saw King James, his head of red hair, his Scottish ancestors, like, we can't trust this guy. He shouldn't even be king. He should have been this person. This crazy Scotsman's got to go. So was Shakespeare really going to write a play with King James' great-great-great-great-great-granddaddy out there being a devious backstabber? No, he changes Banquo. And the Banquo in the play, I want you to write this down. It's not really a spoiler, because you're going to meet Banquo pretty quick. He's a very important character in Act 1. I don't know who's playing Banquo. I should check. He turns him into a good guy. He turns him into a very faithful, brave, honorable person. He's Macbeth's best friend. Why would Shakespeare do this? Well, who was writing Shakespeare's paycheck?
King James.
You don't want to do that to your boss. If you know anything about the gunpowder plot of 1601, somebody tried to blow up Guy Fawkes and other domestic terrorists trying to blow up the Parliament building in England. There was a lot of unrest around the time Macbeth was being written. So this would be very bad if you try to put the king in a critical view. Okay, this is a little, you know how I do little baseball cards for like Persepolis? Like, here's when it was written, here's what to call it. Same thing for Things Fall Apart. Get this down. I'm going to shut up for a minute and let you guys get this down. These are things I want you to know. You don't want to call Macbeth a novel, because novels have chapters and like paragraphs. This is not a novel. It's a play. You can call it a tragic drama. I want you to know when it was set, when it was written, where it was written, and its full title. Though you can just call it Macbeth. Okay, I'm moving pretty quick. I want you to know that Macbeth is set mostly in Scotland. If you're not sure where Scotland is, it's part of the same island that England exists on. There's at least one scene in Scotland that's set, there's one scene in Macbeth that's set in England. I want you to know it's set during the 11th century. That means it's around the year 1050. It's a long time ago. It's a very long time ago. Shakespeare is as old to you as Macbeth would be to Shakespeare. Like the person, like the historical thing. So Macbeth is very, very, very much a historical play for Shakespeare. For us, it's almost unfathomably distant. We're talking like Middle Ages. This is not the prim and proper Elizabethan England where Shakespeare lived. This is the dark and dusty and bloody and creepy and maybe magical, who knows, England of 1,000 years ago. Okay, poppin'. Moving on to, let's talk about Macbeth. We're shifting gears. I have something to put on. You know what? I'll just leave it like this. This is fine. We don't need to change slides. Put a horizontal line because we're going to talk a little bit about like nitty-gritty Macbeth stuff. I know your hand hurts. I know, guys. I'm sorry. Gotta move fast.
Mr. Benton, is this gonna get a break?
You guys should take a break. It's fine, man.
I was supposed to take a break while I was something else.
What? You guys are tough. You guys are good. Man. Blank verse. Got blank verse. Come on, keep going. You got it. Blank verse is poetry that isn't rhymed. If you're not like, you don't want, I just want you to call it a poetry that doesn't rhyme. It has a name. It's called blank verse. Some of Macbeth is written with rhymes when the witches talk, but most of it, there's no rhyme. That said, the vast majority of Macbeth is written as poetry. Again, not poetry because it rhymes. Poetry because it has a certain meter. Let's talk about meter. Iambic meter is a beat. If you are a musician, this is very easy for you. An I am sounds like a heartbeat. It sounds like a ba-bum, ba-bum, ba-bum. Like an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. Again, ba-bum. Like the word prefer. Or if I said, I do. Or if I said, goodbye. These are all iams. This is a really common thing that happens in the English language. It's a really common thing that happens in many languages. But Shakespeare really gravitates to the I am. And it's one thing that makes poetry poetry in Macbeth. Let's talk about this times 5. Let's talk about iambic pentameter. 5. Penta, penta, penta. By the way, hear me on this. Iambic pentameter is just 5 iambic meters. Again, if an iambic meter is ba-bum, iambic pentameter is ba-bum, 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 ba-bum. It's 10. It's 5 compartments. So it's a total of 10 syllables. In Macbeth, I think the first line we actually hear Macbeth say is this. Not this. He doesn't say this. I just made up something stupid. He says, so foul and fair a day I have not seen. So foul and fair a day I have not seen. If you read Romeo and Juliet, you might remember it had a prologue. 2 households, both alike in dignity and fair Verona, where we lay our seed, all that jazz. If you ever want to check, and hell, this thing that you looked at this morning is in full iambic pentameter. Every line's got exactly 10 syllables. It's not that hard to do, but it takes work. It definitely takes an effort, and it's not something that happens on accident. If I asked you, hey, is this an iambic pentameter? Instead of having to feel the beat, you can just kind of count to see that there's 10 syllables. It's the easiest way to tell. There are characters who don't speak an iambic pentameter, but they're not normal people. They're either not humans or they're very drunk. Let's talk about couplets. Here's another rhyme thing. Sorry, poetry thing. When there are rhymes in Shakespeare, in Macbeth, I should say. Let's talk about Macbeth. They're usually couplets. Couplets are, if you find out that somebody's a couple, maybe it's just because you heard people talking about them. But if you see them holding hands in the hallway, they're snuggling together, if they're consecutive, if they're next to each other, it's kind of a dead giveaway. They're probably a couple. A couplet is 2 lines of poetry that rhyme, that are next to each other. Here's a line from Romeo and Juliet. Good night, parting is such sweet sorrow that I shall say good night till it be morrow. Sorrow and morrow rhyme. Sometimes rhymes are silly. Often they're suggesting something. If you know anything about this moment in Romeo and Juliet, it's the last time they see each other. So the fact that sorrow and tomorrow are rhyming is important. It's foreshadowing. It's telling you more. So what am I trying to say? If you see a couplet in Macbeth, circle it, note it, look at it, consider. Mr. Benton's probably going to ask me why this is here. Why does it matter? Okay. Woo. Let's talk about his plays. I don't know why I called it Shakespeare plays, but whatever. I had a professor who had a professor, and that person's name is Engel. And Engel was a Shakespeare expert on performance. And they noticed that one of three things starts off every Shakespeare play. And some Shakespeare plays start with two of these. Go ahead and get these down. And I want you to think about what they have in common. All of Shakespeare's plays start with one of these three things. Romeo and Juliet starts with the first two. A heinous amount of the first two, actually. It's wild that we have 8th graders read it. What do these have in common? What do they all do to the audience? What's it make them say?
Get you intrigued.
Yeah. It catches attention. It catches attention. It makes people lean in. It's an attention grabber. The Tempest starts with a storm destroying a boat. And people are flying off the boat and dying, and there's a supernatural element to the storm. Macbeth starts with this one. Spooky, scary. The first scene of Macbeth features witches. I saw a former student doing a performance at Eckerd College once of Macbeth. And you know how they normally flash the lights to tell you to sit down at a play? They do the little thing, they're telling you to sit. They did not do that. They just plunged the entire theater into darkness, and they started the play. There was just screaming and flashing lights, and it was very well done. I think some people freaked out. The college students had complete control over what they did, so they probably got in trouble. Because I know one lady tripped and fell. But it was a scary start to the play. They pulled it off. Okay, let's talk about Macbeth. We're getting there. This is going to be the part where oh my God, I'm about to get a theme log, aren't I? Yes, you are. Yes, you are. There are a couple thematic motifs, and I'm keeping it very simple. I was going to go nuts. I was going to give you guys a trillion things, and I decided I just want to give you a few. So let's go with ambition. You guys know what ambition is. I want to give you faith. And by the way, think about the opposite of ambition. Think about the opposite of faith. Those are all things too. Which one kind of scribble down? Give up violence. If you're getting no Congo flashbacks, oh my God.
How would you define theme log in a poem?
Don't worry, man. It's not hard. It's a play. I know. You're gonna be nuts. You look at action. What people do. And here are two more. Sorry, it's so janky looking. It's like a PowerPoint from 2006. Not really. Basically. Part of it is nature versus the unnatural. And gender. Specifically, and I have the word manhood there, but this also ties into human nature. I want you to track two of these. Sure. Spooky.
Mr. Bennett said nature and.
I'm going to go back to this hang a second. People are struggling. 3 words, I'm going to die. Here we go, here, boom. Nature and the natural. Just to talk about these really quick, so you can kind of make an informed pick. Guys, we're not going to take the whole period. I know this is going real long. You're being great. You're being patient. Make a little note next to this. I just want to help you. I don't want you to die about halfway through the play. No matter who you are, even if you don't want to track it, it's going to be useful to you for quizzes and journals. If you're looking at ambition, look at what makes people do what they do. Look at people's motivations. What makes people do what they do? Motivations are really important. Faith. Well, you guys know, maybe you believe in destiny or not. I'm not talking about spirituality here. Think about your own life. There's a lot of things you have complete freedom over. There's a lot of things you don't. There's a lot of things that are just way above your pay grade you can't control right now. You guys know exactly what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about this thing. Some things are preordained for you that you can't control. Some things you can. So it's about the tension between those two. How do you navigate that? How do you navigate what you can control versus what you can't control? Violence is pretty obvious. I don't know if any of you are real violent people. I don't think so. But it's more about cruelty. Willingness to be nasty. willingness to be mean, willingness to be kind of terrible. This one is more of a difference, the tension between what things are, what things should be, versus what they actually are. One thing about Macbeth is that the world is presented as a place that's a little bit out of order. It's in chaos. It's in disorder. It's a little bit wacky. It was written during a time when England was going through a huge identity crisis. They had multiple coups and attempts to overthrow the government. It was a time of great confusion and cultural change. And this last one is probably the broadest. Even though it does deal with gender, it mostly deals with what it is to be a person. Okay, let's talk about symbols. We're almost done, I promise. There's a few. So the first one, visions and hallucinations. There are some literal visions, like supernatural things that may or may not be real. They could be hallucinations. You could very much say, all right, this character's just crazy. They didn't see anything. They just think they did. This is a play about a schizophrenic person. That's possible. That's possible. Seriously. Shakespeare likes to keep it ambiguous. But these represent more than just what they are. They kind of help us understand a little bit about life. Blood is... Now, Shakespeare's plays have a lot of people die. The tragedies, people die all over the place. People die in Macbeth, but there's definitely plays where more people die than just Macbeth. As many people that die in Macbeth is the same as Romeo and Juliet. But there is not a play with more blood on stage. Macbeth is Shakespeare's bloodiest play. And it talks about blood the most as well. So blood is a really important symbol. Last one is sleep. Something that you guys might be short on, but hopefully you get a lot more of next week. All of these combine, by the way, at certain times. There are moments in the play where all three of these happen at the same time. You mean visions about blood and sleep? Yes. Good. All right. Short break. Short break. Here's what I want you to do. How do you head it? Your name. Your block. Macbeth. And you might not want to put a thematic motif yet. Take a little break. It might be useful to write these inside of it, okay? Something that you might do on your theme log, by the way, is you know your theme log's got two sides. I want you to pick two different thematic motifs to track it. I promise you're not going to have a hard time finding examples. There will be a moment where you have a hard time for a part, and then you'll say, oh wow, it's so easy now. It's hard in Act 2, but it's really easy in Act 3. You can kind of pick any two. I'm not going to have you guys rush for a sheet and sign up. Any two are good. Out of those 5, okay? The other thing you might want to do, up here, you guys see up here in the top left, it says notable symbols. All of the symbols, there's not that many, I just gave you 3. All of the symbols are connected to all the themes. And that's one thing that makes Shakespeare kind of interesting as a writer, is how interconnected everything is. So I'm really not worried about you guys finding examples. I think you're going to have an easy time with that. This next chunk of the notes is about the language of Shakespeare and a little bit of terminology to help you out reading the play. I know I'm giving you a million things to pay attention to. So if you're a little bit overwhelmed, it's okay. Breathe. Let's talk about Elizabethan times. Here's some words. I'm going to start with the weirdest things first and get to something that's simpler. The word air, E-R-E. It's pronounced just like the stuff you breathe. And it means before or prior to. It means before or prior to. If I said, I always shower ere I go to bed. I do. I think it's gross. You go to bed, you're all well, then your bed's gross. I mean, don't shower when you wake up, man. Shower when you go to bed, or do both. Whatever. Then your pillow smells like fun. Okay? Get me off my pillow.
Oh my god.
Before or prior to. Mark. You kind of hear this with cartoon villains, mark my words. It literally means write this down, like what you're doing right now. Mark my words, you're literally marking my words. You're marking them down in your little notebook. Mark means listen up, buddy. Pay attention. If I said, hey, mark me, it means listen up. Listen up, jerk. It's not rude, it's just very insistent. It's a command word. The third one's kind of funny, anon. Anon, and this shows up a lot in Romeo and Juliet. Everyone's running around in Romeo and Juliet, screaming, crying. It means hurry up. It means quick. It means I'm on my way. And on and on and on and on. These are still technically part of the English language, but not in a 21st century American. You'll see them in Macbeth every now and then. This is part of like that 2% of the words that you'll see in the play. 2% of the words you see in the play just aren't used by people nowadays. Okay, next comes fortune. By the way, capital F. Capital F. Maybe you think of like a fortune cookie. That's that. Okay, you're with me. It means fate. Maybe you don't believe in what the fortune cookie says. Maybe you just like try to see who has the worst one. You make fun of. Fortune is about destiny. Fortune's about fate. And maybe your fortune is you'll make a lot of money. Maybe you'll have a big old fortune. But the word fortune here is almost this embodied idea of lady luck. Like fortune, almost like a goddess who has like a destiny for everybody. Fortune smiles on you. Let's talk about wherefore. Anybody read, quick show of hands, anybody read Romeo and Juliet last year? Nobody in here. Okay, that's cool. There's a famous quote. I bet you know what it is. Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? It's a moment in the play where she's not asking where Romeo is. She has no idea where Romeo is, and if she did know, she'd be shocked because he's down in the bushes. This means pourquoi. This means pourquoi. This means what for. It means wherefore. It means why. You with me? Right pourquoi. Right pourquoi. Right what for, man? It means why. If you see wherefore in Macbeth, it does not mean where. It means why. It means why. And it still is part of the language, we just don't use it very much anymore. We still say what for. If I like knocked your stuff off your desk, you'd be like, what for? What'd you do that for? Same thing. Proof. Maybe you got a waterproof, well, most people's phones are pretty waterproof now. Bulletproof vest, fireproof material. Proof means armor. If you're lapped in proof, that means that you're strapped up. You're protected against attack. Okay? Last one. Here's a weird word. Wanton. Wanton. The root of the word is wanton. If I called a kid a wanton, not wanton. It's somebody who's like, kind of like a whiny, spoiled brat. Somebody who's like an iPad baby. You don't take the iPad away? That's their sweet baby. iPad baby. Wanton means iPad baby. They're kind of unrestrained, kind of controlled by desires. Usually it implies somebody's brain is not just ambitious, but they like are selfish to the point that they don't have control over themselves. All right, flying by. We're shifting from like just older words to some allusions, some cultural terms. These are things that Shakespeare's audience would get that you and I are not going to get. Let's talk about Bellona, not baloney, Bellona. Any of you Percy Jackson kids, you know your Greek mythology. You might not know your Roman mythology. By the way, Shakespeare wouldn't know anything about Greek mythology because it wasn't translated into English yet. That happened in the later Renaissance. But he knew the hell out of his Roman mythology. So all the names like Zeus, he wouldn't know Zeus, he'd know Jupiter. He wouldn't know Poseidon, he'd know Neptune. Bellona is the Roman goddess of war. There's a joke early in the play about Bellona's boyfriend. If you're Bellona's boyfriend, that means that if you can tangle with her, like romantically, you're a good warrior. It's used to describe Macbeth. Unless you were like a baby playing Skyrim, when Skyrim came out the year you guys were born, right? Basically. Maybe you know what a Thane is? The Thane of Whiterun or whatever? A Thane is a ruler of a city-state or a governor of a territory. It's a noble position. It's not the king. The king is the monarch of the entire land. A Thane is like appointed. If I appointed you Thane, you are very important. You are a step below the king. You are the head of a tribe, clan. Usually a military group too. Okay? Especially in the Middle Ages. If you were a king, it's because you were tough. Moving from cultural terms to what happened? Where's my mouse? I'm here. Stage directions. If any of you are thespians, you know that stage directions are usually things that you just figure out by speaking of thespians. Hi. Of course, plug on in. Some of your plays are going to have archaic stage directions in them, and you'd be like, why is it like this, Mr. Bennett? Write down the word exude. Some of your copies of the play use these old directions, and I don't want you to not know what they mean. It's just the Latin for the word they access. It means people get off stage. If you ever had to do a play in elementary school or middle school, or you perform on stage for elementary school, basically you know that the most important thing you can do is know when to get on stage and get off stage. That's really important. And when you're reading a play, you need to know who's on stage and who's off stage. You have to visualize it. So, entering and exiting. Next thing, an aside. Hey, when you're on stage, you're talking loud, like I'm talking right now. You can't actually whisper, because if you whisper on stage, no one can hear you. That said, there are moments in drama where characters have to whisper to each other. If I needed to talk to Maria, and she and I were in a scene together, but in the scene, I needed to speak a secret that only she can hear. I would get close to her, and I would probably do like a loud whisper, like this. The audience would know, oh, he's talking to Maria, and only Maria can hear him. You with me? An aside is when a character speaks, and I should add to this, sometimes they're speaking just to the audience, sometimes they're speaking to another character. An aside tells you they've sort of stepped aside and they're speaking privately, either to their friend or their confidants or the audience themselves. But some of you signed up for music, whether you know it or not. Don't get too excited about Hot Boys. No boy can see that. Grayson's excited about Hot Boys. Oh, Williams are Hot Boys. There we go. For the music, for the Act 1 scene, whatever. Okay. Hot Boys are, Shakespeare wrote it in the script because he thought it would sound very medieval. It was a type of instrument people didn't play anymore. It would be like, when you picture medieval music, you picture some droning little thing. It's kind of like a bagpipe with no bag. It's kind of like an oboe, a double reed instrument. It's like a bassoon, someone chopped it in half. Well, when it comes time for that scene, William's going to have some tunes. William, it does not have to actually be historically accurate. You can bring whatever beats you want. Okay. But the idea of Hot Boys are like a nobleman's fancy dinner party music, okay? It might be like to dance to. It might be to like just to wine and dine. Is this working for you guys, or is it broken? You guys with me? Look, just write music notes next to Hot Boys. If you think of nothing else, just think of Will and music notes. Okay. Alarm. This is also an archaic term. It's not an alarm sound. Nowadays, you might think, oh, it's like a wah, wah, wah. No, it's the sound of fighting. It's battle sounds. Like off stage, you might have people like whoa, banging things together and screaming. If you signed up for alarms, and who did? Anyone remember? Grayson. Grayson's it just lets the audience know off stage there's still like a war going on. You can have explosions. I don't care if it's like Halo background. It doesn't matter. It just has to sound like people are fighting. That'll let us know. And that's really important for the play. All right? Here's a map of Scotland. By the way, you do not need to know the map of Scotland, but I do want you to know that all of the places mentioned in the play are real places. If you want to look them up on Google Earth, Google Maps, you can. You can see them. All right. Is this the end of the play? You do not need to write this part down. Just hear me. When Shakespeare died, he wrote a piece for his tombstone prior to his death. He wrote a piece for his tombstone that reads, "A good friend for Jesus' sake forbear, to dig the dust and close it here. Blessed be the man that spares these stones, and cursed be he that moves my bones." It's a curse on anybody who disturbs this corpse. I guess it's... No, you don't need to write that. Just an interesting bit of trivia. They recently shot some x-rays down through the ground that I guess he's still there. Nobody's messed with his bones, so good for them. When he died, his biggest rival, his biggest op at the time, his biggest competition was a guy named Christopher Marlowe. They were always competing. Christopher Marlowe was like always losing out to Shakespeare for the most tickets sold and things like that. But when he died, Chris Marlowe wrote that Shakespeare was not just of an age, but for all time. And to some extent, that's true. Shakespeare's still around. People are still reading him. I'm part of the problem. I like it. Okay.